it's that time of the week again. It's time for Programming by Stealth, and this is Installment 178, recorded March 17th, 2025. I'm your host, Allison Sheridan, and of course, I'm joined by your lovely co-host, Bart Buchatz, who for some reason is wearing green today.
Yeah, March 17th, I'm wearing a green jumper, I'm wearing a Celtic knotwork necklace, I have an Apple Watch with a shamrock. I wonder why. Oh, well.
You've got it pretty well covered. Well, hey, before we get stuck in, we are going to end up taking, you're going to miss 2 installment weekends. So I forget, is that a month and a half from now? Does that mean?
6 weeks.
Yeah, before we come back, because I will be attending my granddaughter's birthday party for one of them, and I will be in Japan on the other one. And rather than try to figure out the time zones between Japan and Ireland, we opted that we are going to be back. Let's see, if you're not watching Evergreen, we will be back, where is it? The 26th of April.
I will be at my beautiful guide daughter's birthday party on the same day you're at a birthday party as well.
So little kids win. Sorry.
Yes. Well, especially since I'm her guide father, you know, I have to be extra good and have really nice presents, and they're STEM related as well. Because
I love it. Do you say guide daughter? We say goddaughter.
Yes. Well, I would be a godfather, but my brother and sister are humanists. My brother and sister-in-law are humanists, and so I took the oath to be her guide father, not her godfather.
That's actually lovely. That's lovely. Yes. I like it.
And one of the things I've taken responsibility for is helping with her education. I swore to that, and so I take great joy in finding fun STEM-based toys, and so far she enjoys the toys and just happens to be learning by accident, which is what we want.
Maybe we need to swap toy ideas, because I've been foisting that on my grandchildren. So,
oh, good. Excellent.
All right. Well, we got a lot to do today, so we better get stuck in.
We do indeed. So in the previous installment, we got started with Jekyll. We created a very simple site. We added Bootstrap into it so that we feel at home. That's like the minimum I thought we could do to get started is we just need enough of a theme to have Bootstrap, and then we'll be fine. We will, of course, be building it up over the course of this series, but that was our starting point. And we spent a lot of our time learning how to create our site on our local PC or Mac, and then running it both locally so that we could see our changes in real time, and so pushing it so that we could see it on GitHub pages on the real internet, hosted for free. So we have a little bit of a cleanup to do on that, because something we didn't talk about, because at the time I wasn't sure how, because this teacher is about 1 episode ahead of the class. You asked me the question I was hoping you wouldn't ask me too quickly. So, Bart, how do I get my site that's now working just fine on my first Mac and get it working just fine on my second Mac? Which is a problem I have too, because sometimes I like to work on my laptop and sometimes I like to work on my podcasting machine. So I had the same problem. I was going to solve it, but anyway, you hurried me along. So we get to start there today. And then we're going to move on to, I want to do some real content in Jekyll so that we at least get our feet under us. And so we're going to start with the absolute simplest of taxonomies that are supported in the Jekyll content management system. Plain old pages. Not too heavy a lift.
That's what you think. We'll see.
We shall see. Yes. So this is the start of our real dive into Jekyll. So I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping here just to set the rules for the next whatever number of installments it takes us. We are not going to make a new demo site for every single example from now on, because that's not a good way to learn. What we're going to do is follow the actual process of building a site from scratch. So we're going to have one demo site and we're going to add some content. It's going to be silly content, but it's going to be equivalent to real content. And as we do, we're going to run into pain points, naturally, and we're going to solve them. And in the process, we're going to learn all of the things we need to learn. And hopefully I don't have to do too many wrap-up episodes at the end where I tie in all the things I wasn't able to fit into the story. I'm pretty sure we'll get there naturally which will make it a lot more fun because it's easier for me to explain why something is needed if you've literally run into the problem. You're looking at it going,
right.
This needs to do that. How?
I need some, what's my motivation, Mr. DeMille?
Exactly. So it's going to be one demo site that we build up and build up and build up. So I've created a new GitHub repository, which I've given a really imaginative name. I've called it pbs-jekyll-demo site. Shockingly exciting. I've started it with not quite where we left off in the last installment, because where we left off in the last installment was intentionally silly. I made the background look silly to prove that we could customize Bootstrap. Not because it was a tasteful customization, just to prove we could. And I added a really silly alert just to prove that the JavaScript aspects of Bootstrap were working properly. So I rewound by 1 to just before we got silly. I took that as my basic starting point, and then I changed the text and the placeholders and stuff just to be generic instead of saying PBS 177, just to make it more generic. And that's the starting point that we're actually going to start from. So if you clone it and it's not blue, don't be surprised.
This is where I took a bullet for the team, because while Bart was slumbering away, I was sitting there trying to get this to work, going, why isn't it blue? It's wrong. This isn't working. This is working. And when he woke up, he's like, oh, yeah, I undid the blue part and the silly alert. So that's why the show notes now tell you, don't worry, it won't be blue.
Blue, yes. So I'm sort of thinking ahead. And some of you are going to be following along on real time. And so what you're going to do is you're going to clone the starting point once, and you're going to follow along through every installment. And so what you have and what I have is going to be the same completely automatically. You won't have to do anything. But some of you will dip in and out. And so you might skip an installment and then pick it up again. So there has to be a mechanism for people to do that. And the other thing that's going to happen over time, because we know this, that there are people who are now on like installment 20. Because they've just found the series and get stuck in. And this is pretty evergreen content. So it needs to be possible for anyone 3 or 4 years from now to teleport into the third point in the Jekyll story. So I'm going to do that using a nice feature of Git that we learned about a long time ago. And I did put the link in the show notes. The
108?
installment. Yeah, 108. That's a while ago. 70 episodes ago. Called Git Tags. So every commit in Git has a name, which is literally a hash. It's not human friendly. Guaranteed to be unique, but it's not human friendly. So a tag is just a pretty human friendly name that you attach to a specific commit. And so you can use that to say, I want to check out the repository at this point in time. It's like a little marker that says here. And so I'm going to make a tag for every starting point. And then you can so GitHub, so this is not a Git feature. So GitHub takes tags and turns them into releases. This is not a generic Git feature. This is a GitHub feature. And what it does is it zips the entire repository at that point in time and saves them and gives them a little name and puts them in the side menu in the repository. So you can go to releases and just download a snapshot without having to do any Git.
Okay. Now, I did get tangled on this part too, is that for this particular installment, the tag that we're supposed to look for is also the identical with main. So I kept trying to figure out how it was different, and that tangled me up a bit, but it's one and the same right now.
Yes, right now it's the same. And I guess if you keep exactly pace with us, it'll always be the same, but there'll be a breadcrumb trail behind us of named tags for every previous episode.
Right. I think that'll make a little bit more sense in the next one, but right.
Yeah. So basically, your 3 options are just download it now and keep with us. This is a little bit brittle because if you make a mistake and get lost, or if you skip an episode, well, now you have a mess. So, some people will choose to do that. The second option is just to download the zip file every time, make a new folder, download the zip file, do this installment, throw it in the bin. Next time, download the next zip file, do it again, lather, rinse, repeat. Or the fancy pants approach is to make full use of Git, fork the repository on GitHub so you have your own copy, pull my changes from what your fork will call upstream, and then you'll have a copy of the tags too. And so you can jump around in your copy and then you can work away and then publish it to the internet yourself and do whatever tweaks you want. So something for everyone.
I think I'm going to download yours. As much fun as the third option does sound, I've run into trouble when I do that because I have a habit of messing around with it and saying,
well, you'd like
I
to
don't
go
like
off piste. Sorry, off script.
Yes, exactly. And then that ends up causing problems later down the line. So I'm going to try to be good. We'll see.
Yeah, but you have all three and there's no reason you can't jump around, right? Do whatever works. Change your mind. Right. It doesn't matter. Another conversation I want to have now, so I don't have to have it every single time, is about file paths. Because up until this point, in all 177 previous episodes, it's never been confusing what I'm being relative to. When we were building basic websites with HTML and CSS, it was like, well, it's relative to the folder that contains our little dummy website. If we were doing web apps, it was relative to the base of the web app. When we were working in Git, it was relative to the Git repository. Well, we're now using Jekyll inside a GitHub repository. The root of the GitHub repository is one thing, and then there's a folder in there called docs, and that's the root of the Jekyll website. Which one are we going to consider to be the root? So until now, I've been looking at the repository, and that made sense because we were talking GitHub pages in general. So we used GitHub pages to public static web apps, and then we used GitHub pages to publish a Jekyll site. But from now on, we're not talking GitHub pages. We're talking Jekyll. So our universe now is Jekyll. So everything we do is going to be inside that docs folder while we're working in GitHub pages. But really, you could take that same docs folder and use a different hosting service and publish it just fine. But it may not be inside docs. That other hosting service might put it inside public HTML or something. So we shouldn't keep telling people docs is important because from the Jekyll point of view, it's absolutely irrelevant. It's just a GitHub convention. So we are now going to teleport. From now until we're finished talking Jekyll as a content management system, the root is the docs folder. So if I say index.md, I mean the index file inside the docs folder while we happen to be on GitHub. And if you move somewhere else, there may not be a docs folder, which is why we're going to stop mentioning it. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, that does. Okay.
Okay. Right. And with all that done, let's answer your question. I have access to a GitHub repository with a pre-existing, pre-created Jekyll-based website. I want to start testing it locally. How? So if you're going to test locally, that means you have to run Jekyll locally. Jekyll is a Ruby app. Therefore, you need to have a Ruby environment locally. So actually, a lot of the work you have to do is exactly what we covered in the previous installment, which is to get yourself up and running in Ruby. So the first thing to do is to follow the instructions for preparing to run Jekyll locally in installment 177. Those of you who are very diligent will notice that the show notes in 177 have become more verbose, more detailed than they were last time, because Ruby is a temperamental little gem of a language.
And that's only because we don't allow swearing on this show that he said it like that.
Yes, while there was no microphone in front of my face, I had very different words. Being in Ireland, I have some choice vocabulary, and I used it all. But anyway, I ran into some problems. I took the opportunity to learn a little bit more about exactly how Ruby hangs together. I tried my best to capture as much of my pitfalls by making what was there a little bit more verbose and adding lots and lots of bright orange warning triangles.
And after Bart got it working for him, I went in and came up with a completely different set of problems. And I'm just going to, so in the show notes, one of the things that he says is, okay, you want to get your Ruby that is the version that GitHub Pages wants you to use. So he links to it and it says it's Ruby 3.3.4. It says Ruby 3.3.4, and then it has a link to Ruby. But if you go there, it takes you to 3.4.2. Now, I decided to do what Bart said, and I did 3.3.4, and the install failed, and I did 3.4.2, and it worked. So we decided what we were going to say about this is, we wish you the best of luck.
Yeah. One of the things I hoped might happen is that I would stop disliking Ruby, and that learning Jekyll would finally give me a reason to really get to know Ruby and maybe get to like Ruby. No, I will tolerate it. That is it. That is as far as I'm going. I tolerate Ruby. And I disunderstand it less.
We basically, yeah, this is as nice as we can be about it.
Pretty much. So once you have Ruby installed, you also need to make sure you have Bundler installed, because Bundler is the equivalent of the Node package manager for JavaScript. It goes and fetches all the gems and makes Ruby do its thing. So there are basically PBS 177 tells you how to install Bundler, and there are two little commands you can use just to check. Do I have Ruby up and running on this computer? So you can say Ruby -- version. And if it's a stock Mac running the out-of-the-box Ruby, it'll be 2 point something. This is not sufficient for running Jekyll. You need to do the instructions to get to Ruby 3 point something. And the other thing you need is Bundler. So you can check if you have Bundler by typing the command bundle space -- version. And yes, Bundler installs the command bundle. They didn't think of making those the same. No.
Okay. We did that last time, though.
We did.
So we're good there.
We're good there. So actually, assuming you have those two things done, it's actually really simple. Clone the repository, open a terminal. What you will find in that repository, if it really is a Jekyll site, is a gem file, which will tell Bundler everything Bundler needs to know. So the only thing you have to do is go bundle install, and Bundler will do everything for you, and you're good to go.
It goes and looks at the gem file and it gets what it needs, and it's kind of like the package.json?
Package.json. That's exactly what it's like.
Okay.
That's exactly what it's like. Perfect.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So this is equivalent to our doing npm install, which will read the package.json. We say bundle install, and it reads the gem file. So yeah, very analogous. And that's it. Good to go. So Our worked example is to practice what I've just said to you using our Git repository so that you're away.
Git repository, again, this is going to be PBS 178 starting point, the tagged release that we're going to look for, and choose one of those three paths you talked about.
Precisely. So download and extract the zip file, open it in your terminal, fork the repository. You're then going to clone your fork down to your computer.
That's or.
Or, precisely. Yeah, so if you have the zip file and you've extracted, you're finished. Done.
Okay.
Or you've forked the repository, clone your fork, and then you check out the commit that has the tag PBS 178 starting point. Because you don't check out a tag, it's just a label for a commit. So you're actually checking out the commit. And as we learned when we were studying Git, when you check out a commit rather than a branch, you can't make any changes because you have a detached head. So you solve this problem by just making a new branch. Just say, make a branch here. Now you're on a branch. Away you go.
All right.
So at that point in time, open your terminal into your folder, however you got it, into the docs folder, because that's our website. Bundle install to get everything up and running. Bundle exec Jekyll serve. Ta-da! You have the starting point with a white background and no alert.
And at this point, if you do that bundle exec Jekyll serve, that basically means keep it updating as often as I make any changes. So you may have to refresh the screen to see the changes, but that's it. It's building the site all the time. So you're going to hear Bart or read in his show notes, build it again, build it again, build it again. You don't actually have to do that if you're running bundle exec Jekyll serve.
Yeah, you can just watch it and you'll see it go, oh, I've seen one file change. Processing, done. Oh, I've seen one file change. That's so pleasing.
It's very nice. It's very nice.
I just have my terminal in the bottom corner, and all I have it showing next to my code editor is just the very bottom line, and I've just wait to see the word done. I hit Command S, and I just wait to see the word done.
And then you can refresh, right?
Then I can refresh, exactly.
So I will give a little bit of advice. If last time you created, in the last week, if you created a PBS 170 something starting point sort of looking folder, make sure you're not in that when you're trying to follow Bart's instructions, because it doesn't work at all. Not that I did that. Not that I didn't lose a half an hour. Going, why isn't it refreshing? I'm building it. I'm serving it. Anyway.
Yeah, the other one to look out for, I'll give you another bonus tip that are definitely not because I did this to myself. But if you have one terminal window open that's still running bundle exec from 2 weeks ago, and still serving out on port 4000, if you open a fresh terminal window and try to do it again, it's not going to get port 4000 because it's busy with your terminal from 2 weeks ago. So you got to go kill that, and then you can start again.
I'm glad you didn't do that.
Definitely didn't do that. Yeah. Okay. So we are going to start making new Jekyll content. But before we do, we're going to take the opportunity to put a little bit more meat on a rather important bone. So we have said that the whole concept of a static site generator is you have a folder that contains your content, any theme assets you need to make the content pretty, and then you run some sort of an app that converts that folder of stuff into a website. And that's what Jekyll does. And that is correct. It's just missing all the nuance. It's missing all the detail. So let's go a little bit more here. So the first thing is that our folder of stuff is the docs folder. So whenever we talk about stuff being a Jekyll site, it's the docs folder. Jekyll's documentation refers to the process of taking that folder and making the most up-to-date copy of the website as a build session. So every single time you run a Jekyll serve and you see it updating itself, that's a build session. So when you hit Command S and there's a change, that's a build session. And then you hit Command S again, that's another build session. And each of those build sessions is a 4-step process. So the very, very, very first thing it does is it basically does the Ruby part. So your gem file has told Bundler what to install, but your gem file also lists any optional plugins you've added into your Jekyll. So the very, very first thing Jekyll does is it checks that gem file and loads the appropriate plugins. And those plugins, they will all have a default configuration, but many of them are customizable, which is something we're going to discover later in the series, because you can have a lot of fun by having customizations. And those customizations exist in _config.yml. So while it's setting up those plugins, it's reading your config to do your custom version of whatever, right? You can tweak the way the Markdown is rendered. You can tweak the way code blocks are shown. Do you want to have a little copy button? All those kind of things, right? That's all in that config file. So as it's setting up those plugins, it's reading that config. Once it has its plugins, its next thing is to ingest your folder full of stuff. So it literally reads every single file in your docs folder and processes it, interprets it. What it's doing is building a data structure inside itself to represent all of your files and all of your settings and everything. And that
so the docs file is the docs folder is the input considered the input folder, right?
Yes.
Right.
And so that folder of files becomes, in effect, a temporary in-memory database. So the universe is now very like you're used to in the WordPress world, where you have an actual database with your posts and stuff. Well, it effectively built that from scratch by reading that folder, and it now has it in memory. And it's going to keep it there for this build session, and then it's going to forget. But effectively, that's what it's doing. So it now knows everything in your folder. And then it starts to run the appropriate generators to transform that data. So that transform step, we're going to break down in a little bit of time. So going to pause that for now. It does a lot of work. And then when it's done the work, it uses your theme to build the actual output, which it calls rendering. So initialize, read, run, render. So that run step needs a little bit more detail. So the first thing it does is what it calls a shallow pass. So at this stage, the data is still in the shape of the files in your docs folder, which means if you have one file that says you should include the other, they're still separate pieces of data. So the first time the data gets processed, it hasn't been assembled. It's just little pieces of data, and each one is processed. So it's impossible to have an infinite loop or to get caught in some sort of a weird knot because they're just little islands of data. So that's what it means to be shallow. It's like you have a jigsaw and it's scattered across the floor, and all it's interested in is it's going to process every jigsaw piece on its own. Just process what's there, process what's there, process what's there, process what's there. Assembling the final picture, that's the render stage. So for now, it's just going to process each one. And the thing it has to do is it has to apply the liquid templates, which is the equivalent of
Wait, you said not
mustache.
to worry our pretty little heads about that.
Well, we're not going to look at how or the syntax. That's literally next installment, actually. But it does that. And so that's a step. So when we talk about how to do that, that's the step where that's going to happen. And if you want to just have an abstract notion in your head about what I mean by liquid templates, think mustache templates from JavaScript. The syntax is awfully similar and the concept is identical. Its function is the same. You're going to have little squirty brackets, which literally are two curly brackets. And you're going to say, I want you to insert this bit here. I can do a loop, all that kind of stuff. So it processes those liquid templates.
By the way, I want to say this is one of the things that's so valuable about the entire concept of programming by stealth. You aren't teaching us languages. You're teaching us concepts and showing us how different languages apply them. Yes. We learned how mustaches work. We understand why they're there, what kind of things they can do for you in the context of JavaScript. Now, this is another instantiation. It's that sort of thing with a different name and maybe a little bit different syntax. And that is the power of what you're doing here.
Very well said. Yes, because the concept is universal, and all you have to do is just learn a new syntax. Right, and that comes up over and over again. Why do we have an easier time learning Bash than JavaScript? Well, we already knew what an if statement was. We just needed the new syntax. Well, we know what mustaches are. We're going to need new syntax. I don't know if it's a feature or a bug that Liquid and Mustache both use two curly brackets. That may break your head, or you may feel right at home. I'm not quite sure.
This would be like my roommate who was studying Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese at the same time.
3 Romance languages. What could possibly go wrong? Oh, God.
They were from 8 to 9, 9 to 10, 10 to 11. She showed me one of her homework papers with a red mark on every single line. She said every word is from the wrong language.
My God. Oh, my God. Well, I hope she passed in the end. She did not make life easy for herself.
Nope. Okay.
Sorry, so that's the shallow pass through the templates. So apply your mustaches. The next thing is conversions are applied. So this is real heavy lifting now. So Markdown gets turned to HTML. Sass gets turned to CSS. So that's a nice bit of computing that Jekyll has to do. So that's the second thing it does.
We learned about that last time, so we should be cozy there.
We should be cozy there. And we're going to see the Markdown conversion in more detail today when we start building pages. And then the final step here is to assemble the jigsaw. So the shallow pass did the mustaches, and we have all of these little pieces. And then the job of the theme is to tell Jekyll how the pieces go to make the final website. And the Jekyll documentation actually describes it like assembling Russian nesting dolls, because you're going to have includes that include includes that include includes that include includes, and the whole thing is going to get assembled in like a 3-dimensional puzzle of doom. But it's very powerful. And so that last step is a lot of very impressive coding by the Jekyll developers, and to us it will just look like magic. But there's some really nice computer science hiding in that final, oh, just put the pieces together. just do that. But that's what it does. So that is how Jekyll pulls things together. Right. Another thing we should learn now, before we start to do too much, is that Jekyll has clearly defined rules about what happens to every file. And those rules are based on 3 signals, 3 factors. The first thing Jekyll cares about is file extensions. Jekyll puts a lot of importance on file extensions. If you write the world's most perfect Sass and you stick it in a file that ends in .css, Jekyll won't know what to do with it, because the file extension tells it it should be treated as Sass. If it sees a .css file extension, it thinks, well, that's not Sass. I don't have to convert that. I'll just copy that completely unchanged into your output. And you have a broken website. So file extensions are very important. Jekyll believes them. It doesn't check inside the file. It's like, well, you said it was a .md file. I'm going to treat it as Markdown. Right? But, it's going to do what your file extension says. The other thing that Jekyll cares about immensely is whether or not any text file starts with YAML front matter. It checks every single text file in your documents folder to see if it starts with 3 dashes on a line by itself. If it does, it gets a little sort of label stuck onto it going, this file has front matter. And that will change Jekyll's processing of that file compared to the other files that don't get tagged as having YAML. So that it really, really matters whether or not a file has front matter.
So can that file with front matter in it have any file extension you like? I mean, can it be Markdown, TXT, whatever?
Yeah, so no matter what type of text file it is, whether or not it has YAML is important to Jekyll.
Okay. So it does peek inside, but just to that first part.
Precisely. And everything gets sorted into 2 categories, yes, no, on the front matter question. And then the last rule is that the configuration file can override defaults. So if the default is that every file that ends in .txt is assumed to be a plain text file, you could, if you're some sort of psychopathic maniac, go into the config file and tell Jekyll that TXT files are Markdown files. And then Jekyll will obligingly do that for you. As a general rule, don't. I have yet to find a valid reason to go into the config file and override the defaults. We are just not going to do that in this series. We are going to accept the defaults, and so everything we learn is going to just work out of the box, and people reading these show notes, trying to find the answers to questions, won't be deeply confused. We're going to keep things simple.
Good.
Right. Okay. So, a nice short summary of the rules, and it's thankfully just 3 rules. So really, there's just these 3 commandments for how Jekyll processes files. So, files and folders starting with an underscore are excluded, which is the jargon that Jekyll uses in the documentation. And
so excluded because you don't want it to do all of this engine stuff on these folders.
Well, excluded from the output means that there won't be a matching file with the same name in the output.
Oh, okay. Just from the output you're talking about. Okay.
Yeah. Now, there's two types of excluded. There's completely, totally, and utterly ignored, as in these files, Jekyll just sees past them. It just ignores them. The second type of exclude is where the file affects what Jekyll does, but the file itself doesn't appear in the output. Your config file has a huge effect on what Jekyll does, but it's not in the output.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. So the underscore layouts folder defines your theme. That isn't in the output. But again, spectacularly big effect on what Jekyll does. So excluded doesn't mean has no effect. It means does not appear in the output. So if it starts with an underscore, it doesn't end up in the output. Wait, why is there a one Markdown files are converted to HTML? Why is that sitting there? Is that some sort of...
Not sure where you lost.
I've lost myself because I have a sub-numbered list with one item in it. That's usually a sign that my brain has gone wrong. Why don't I have one floating
So
item?
I'm seeing the files ignored and then absorbed.
Yeah. I
that's,
think that bullet should be outdented and it should be... Yeah, that should be point 2 in the list. I am so sorry.
Okay.
Right.
By the way, I think I've got had a power outage because I just heard my UPS kick in, which I've never understood why that happens with a whole home battery, but I will be pinging Steve right now to see what's happening. But so far, so good. We didn't lose any power.
We still have internet and I'm still seeing you. Okay, we shall keep going. Wow.
Well, it didn't like that leftover bullet either. It was, power is just upset by that.
Gone away. Right. So the second thing that happens is any Markdown file gets converted to HTML, right? That's our second rule. If the file ends in .md, .mkd, .mkdn, .mkdown, or .markdown, it will get converted to HTML and it will assume that it is Markdown. Right.
That's mighty handy of it to let you have all those different... I always thought it had to be .md.
I pretend it does, mainly because I hate typing long file extensions.
All right.
The third rule is that all other text files that do contain front matter are processed in some way. So this is why it's really important whether or not a file has front matter. If the file has one of the following extensions, it is treated as Sass. So if it ends in .scss or .sass, it will be treated as Sass and it will be converted to plain old CSS. Mm-hmm. And then optionally, if you choose to enable it, any file ending in .coffee will be converted to plain JavaScript using the CoffeeScript converter. So we have never talked about CoffeeScript. It's a language that is simpler than JavaScript, but can be converted to JavaScript. So the theory is someone who doesn't know what they're doing writes CoffeeScript and it becomes JavaScript. We're not going to do it.
Yeah, I have to tell you, when I saw this in the show notes, I thought it was like waffles. I was like, oh, okay. And then you go, wow, it's going to... I wonder if there's a waffle script. I got to find out about this, but okay.
Ooh. If I ever write my own scripting engine, it's being called Waffle Script, right? I can tell you that right now.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. If it doesn't have any of these file extensions, then if there is front matter, the liquid template tags, i.e. our mustaches, are processed. Every other file, so files that don't have front matter and that aren't text files at all, they just get copied straight across. So a JPEG file is not a text file, copy. A .txt file with no front matter, copy. A TXT file with front matter, process it using liquid.
Okay.
Right? They're the rules. That make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll forget
Okay.
this one, but yes.
Well, that's why it's here, so that I will be referring back to it, and you can do so too when we correct that indent so that actually is correct. Right. So the next thing is, okay, these static files and asset things. So this is one of those things, I'm going to get it out of the way now in this first installment. You're going to be cranky, forewarned, because Jekyll have done the thing you never let me do. It has decided that one word should have two completely different meanings. The word
Oh,
asset.
good. You know how I love that.
Yeah, me too. So the word asset has a generic meaning in web design, and it has a Jekyll jargon meaning. And the two are not unrelated, but they're not the same. I
But just
hate
close enough
that.
together to cause your head to hurt, huh?
Very much. And just in case there was any chance we wouldn't get confused, the documentation recommends a naming convention that means you create a folder named assets, which contains both Jekyll assets and generic assets. So if a file meets either definition, the documentation suggests shoving it into a folder named assets, just in case you were going to not be confused.
Okay.
Do not like this. But anyway, so generically speaking, the word asset means things, basically files that contain that don't contain content, right? They're not the actual thing you're trying to say.
So not
They're
that
just
not in that blog post.
not in the blog post. They're files needed to make the web page look good.
Maybe like a favicon would be an asset, right?
Oh, perfect example. Fantastic example. It serves no purpose other than decoration of your tab.
Right.
Yes, that is absolutely an asset. If you're using icons for like the various menus and stuff, or fancy pants little graphic-y bullets, they're all assets. Your entire style sheet is an asset. It is not what your website says, but it is kind of important for how it looks. Your JavaScripts are all assets, right? That's all assets. And then we have this really annoying thing that images may or may not be assets. Because if I have
like
a
your
logo, that's an asset.
It's an asset.
But if I'm writing a blog post and I'm reviewing something and I have a picture of the thing, oh, that's content. That's very, very much content. Because if you were going to take that same content and publish it elsewhere and I sold, oh no, you're not having the image, that would be a problem. So clearly it's content, not an asset. So you can't say images are assets. It's like images are complicated.
Okay.
I've decided that in order for us not to go insane, I am going to apply a very simple rule for images. I'm going to never refer to them as images. I'm going to either talk about them as being graphics, that is to say, assets. So an icon is a graphic. A little fancy bullet point is a graphic. A favicon is a graphic. Our logo in the menu or in the top banner, when it ends up in the site, which isn't there at the moment, will be a graphic. If I add something to the content, I'm going to call it an illustration. It may be a graph, it may be a screenshot, it may be a photograph, but I'm going to call it an illustration because it's there to illustrate the content. And that's how I'm going to mentally keep it straight. And to help us all stay sane, I'm going to expand the default naming convention, and I'm going to say that we will have an assets folder, which is part of the convention. It will contain a subfolder called CSS, part of the convention. It will contain another folder called JS for the JavaScript, part of the convention. Last time we learned that the Sass files go into one of those and the JavaScript files for Bootstrap go in the other. So all with the convention, we're going to keep doing that. We're going to add a new folder, assets/graphics. And when we start adding logos and things, we're going to put them there. And then
so that's going to be our programming by stealth convention.
Yes.
I thought of another way to describe the difference between graphics and illustrations. Graphics are something a blind person doesn't care about.
Yeah.
Right? They don't care that you've got you're in the 1980s and you've created a background with little puppy footprints on it that you made as your backdrop, right? on your GeoCities webpage. They don't care about that.
Right.
But if you've got a graph on there that's explaining a trend line in sales, they care about that. That's an illustration. So they care about illustrations. They don't care about graphics. That's how I'm going to think of it.
Brilliant. Works for me. It's a really good one. Because does it need alt text is the other way to think about it. If it needs alt text,
you're still supposed to put alt text on everything so that they know to not worry about it.
Anyway. Yeah, let's not go there.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got /assets/graphics. That's where we're going to put our images and things that aren't part of the content. Where are we going to put our illustrations then?
We are not going to put them in assets. We're going to make a real point of not putting them in assets. We're going to make a top-level folder, because this is important to me, called illustrations. So we're going to have an assets folder and an illustrations folder. Everything's going to be nice and organized, but very clear. These images are illustrations. These images are assets. So they're in graphics.
So this is a convention that we are going to follow. We will not find this elsewhere.
Precisely. So I've put it in a table. The top two rows of the table are a universally accepted convention. If you don't follow that convention, Jekyll won't break. So it's not a rule, it's a convention. And the second two lines in the table are me expanding that convention so that we have sanity for our image files.
Cool. Excellent. I like it. Maybe the rest of the internet will follow you.
Oh, that would be lovely. I'd like to coin us something. It would be nice.
So now let's
backtrack a tiny bit. So when Jekyll in its jargon talks about an asset, what does it mean? It means two really specific things. There are only two types of asset as far as Jekyll's brain is concerned. SAS files and CoffeeScript files. One of them is optional. CoffeeScript. We're not going to use it. It's disabled by default. We're not going to turn it on. So for us, Jekyll assets is a set of one SAS files.
Yeah. Well, wait a minute. We've got CSS and JavaScript files.
We do. They're not. They're assets in the
not
web
that kind
sense.
of assets. Ah, there it is. There it is.
See? Yeah. The reason it matters...
I really didn't do that on purpose, but that was perfect.
Thank you. The reason it matters is when you go to the Jekyll docs, there's a heading called assets, which you might assume would talk about the generic concept of assets. It doesn't. They're static files. Okay. So if you want to know what to do with your JavaScript, you go to the Jekyll documentation for static files. If you want to know what to do with your SAS, you go to the Jekyll documentation for assets. That confused the heck out of me for the past decade. Finally, I understand. I banged my head off it long enough to write these show notes that I finally understood that it's two words, the same letters, in the same order. They have two completely different meanings.
Okay, so you just said that in Jekyll, there's two things in that are assets. One is CoffeeScript. What is the other one?
SAS.
SAS. And we're only going to have SAS.
Yes. Yes, we are. And that is also...
Which is not to be confused with our _SAS folder, is it?
Oh, no, because that would be far too straightforward, Alison.
Okay.
We're not going there today. That is another pin, right? So we already have a pin in Liquid. Keep a pin in that SAS thing. We're going to do amazingly cool stuff with SAS, but not this week, not next time, and not the time after that. Probably the time after that.
I think that's fall by that time.
Probably, God only knows, because we'll end up having a hiatus somewhere, right? Because it's us. We won't plan it, and we won't give you any advance notice. We'll just disappear.
Well, no. We're having a hiatus for the next two weekends we would normally have recorded, and we warned.
That's fair. That's fair. And we actually, you're right. We've gotten our ducks in a row this time. Good on us.
Yep.
Right. Let us do a worked example, because I've done lots of talking here. let's add an illustration to the homepage. So we're going to do it in 2 steps. So the first step is to add the illustration. And after we add it, we're going to realize that we've made a mess. And then we're going to clean up our mess. But let's make our mess first. We have decided on our naming convention. So step 1, make a new folder in the docs folder called illustrations. We're going to put one file in there, which you're going to find in the installment zip. It is in the installment zip. It has been organized as illustrations-siteillustration.png. That goes into the illustrations folder as siteillustration.png.
Now, I made the words rename it obvious here because I keep, when you say it that way, I don't remember. I don't notice that you're saying to rename it. But yeah, grab the illustrations off the front of it. So it's just siteillustration.png.
Basically, the folder name and file name are in the file name so that the installment zip doesn't have nesting because that's a mess. That's the logic.
Okay.
Anyway, when you have it in there, as soon as you save it, your little Jekyll auto serve thing has already gone and rebuilt your website. So you can go into the _site folder and have a look, and you will see that that folder with that one image has just been copied clean across, right? It doesn't have front matter. It's not a text file. It just got copied clean across. So you can actually visit it if you go to localhost:4000 /illustrations/siteillustration.png, your image is there. So it is published on your website, which means it's ready for us to include in our HTML, in our Markdown. So let's edit index.md. Now, you will find a complete version of the updated file in the zip file as index-1.md, because there's a 2 and a 3, because we're going to have more fun later. While I was adding this illustration, I took the opportunity to actually add some content to our placeholder homepage. So the changes you'll find are, instead of it saying hello world, it now says something vaguely useful, and we add the illustration. Like you hinted at perfectly, we are using Markdown syntax with alt text because this illustration is part of our content. And so our visually impaired users should be told what it is that they are not looking at. What they are, actually, since this is an audio podcast, let's just read the alt text. An illustration showing the PBS logo over the GitHub and Jekyll logos with a plus sign between them. I figured that describes what we're doing. So there we go.
Now remember, the people, the programmers are also blind in a lot of cases. So we're doing it all right.
There we go. Yeah, absolutely. Right. There's no reason you need to be sighted to program. So it's the standard Markdown syntax for an image, which is ! open square bracket, your alt text, close your square bracket, open a round bracket, the relative URL, close your round bracket. And the relative URL is illustrations/siteillustration.png. There we are. You look at the page.
This is a perfect example, Bart, of how we're not saying /docs.
Correct.
What you were trying to explain earlier, you just start right at illustrations, or well, it's not /. There's just no /. You're right at the because you're at the root level already.
Precisely. So if you open that in your browser, the image is there. Depending on the size of your browser window, it's going to look more or less silly. Make your window small and it looks exceptionally silly. Make your window big and it looks different silly. Not good. Now, what we really want is for the illustration to stretch and grow so that it fills the appropriate space. Now, we're using Bootstrap. And the whole point of using Bootstrap is that it has utilities to allow us to do these kind of things. So how do we take advantage of the fact that we took the effort to incorporate Bootstrap? Well, the first thing to say is there is a right way to do this, which is by making the theme handle all images properly. And that is absolutely on our agenda. That is, in fact, on our agenda for quite soon. But for today, that's too much. I don't want to throw a whole new concept at you like that. So I'm going to take this as an opportunity to underline a point. So Jekyll is an open source project. And one of the reasons we love open source projects is they remove the need for us to reinvent every wheel everywhere. And one of the features of open source is that the people who write open source also don't like reinventing wheels. So Jekyll collects together other open source work, like the liquid templating engine. It didn't build that, it took that in. I'm going to learn all about that soon. Another thing it took in was the converter to transform Markdown to HTML. They didn't reinvent that wheel. They took an existing fantastically powerful wheel and included it in Jekyll. And what they use is the open source project Markdown. Markdown is a converter for going from Markdown to HTML. And Markdown is a particularly nice converter because Markdown is very standards compliant for the core Markdown language. So the Markdown language was invented by John Gruber, and he wrote a blog post to basically say, this is Markdown. And since then, that initial Markdown, it does a lot, but it's missing some additional features. So most Markdown engines do a good or bad job at core Markdown, and then they add one or more optional extras. And the optional extras have lots of conventions, but they have no standards. Markdown is great because it does the core Markdown really standards compliant. So it really follows the rules for the core piece. And the extensions it has are very well documented, and they're actually a nice variety of the most popular extensions. And one of those extensions is a mechanism for adding HTML attributes to the HTML tags that come out, which means you can add a style to an image. And you do that by appending the Markdown for the image with an opening curly bracket followed by a colon. So opening bracket colon tells Markdown, I am now speaking to you, Markdown, and I want some sort of extra information to be included in the HTML tag for whatever is straight to my left. And the syntax to add a style is just dot name of to add a class is just dot name of class. Close the curly bracket.
So this would have been really useful to understand 2 days ago when I was trying to put a notice into the show notes from PBS 129 where some adjustments have been made to the ESLint episode because the wonderful Steve Matan wrote to us 7 months ago telling us that some stuff had been deprecated. So I needed to put that bright yellow box that you do, and I spent hours doing it. But now I understand what it was. I was talking to Cramdown because I was saying I want to use the CSS that associated with this class of a notice.
Yes, precisely. So in this case, we're going to use Bootstrap. And Bootstrap provides a class for making images behave nicely. It's called img-fluid. So we want to say to Cramdown, stick class equals img-fluid into the image tag. So it's open curly bracket colon dot img-fluid, close curly bracket. As soon as you hit save, your Jekyll serve rebuilds your site. And if you open the HTML file, you will see what it has done. It has said img src equals the relative URL to our image, alt equals our alt text, class equals img-fluid. It has done what we want.
Nice.
Again, to save you typing, you will find the entire file with the image updated as index-2.md in the installment zip. You can just copy it over index.md or open it and stick in the little bit of Markdown, whatever you prefer.
And the important thing about this is now instead of this giant image that falls off the side of your window when you swing your window width in and out, the image fluidly changes size. It's quite beautiful.
Precisely.
I played with it for a while.
This is why we love Bootstrap, right? Instead of reinventing all these wheels, we just say, yeah, do that thing. And hey presto, that thing. Right. So that was a nice little bonus extra here. We learned a little bit of Cramdown. And I thought it was good to do because I'd seen you struggle a little bit reading the Git commits on 177.
Oh, hush up. Okay.
They're funny.
To be fair, nothing told me how to deal with a multi-line notice in this case that you like it quoted. So it was messing around with the quotes and where to put the notice inside the squirrely brackets there. That was the hard part.
I've taken a mental note to myself, by the way. The author's guide is getting an extra example showing a multi-paragraph notice.
Well, I can give you the text because I saved a copy of what I did so you can see what it has to look like, because it was not trivial.
Well, I know exactly what it has to look like. If you'd asked, I would have told you in a second. But I was going to point you at the author's guide, and then I looked at the author's guide and went, nope, my example is incomplete. So I will fix my example.
Okay. I don't know if you can catch all the mistakes that I found, all the ways that it doesn't work.
I can see your commits. So even if it wasn't in my mind before, it's definitely in my mind now.
Okay. All right. I'll give you that.
Okay. Let's wrap up today with a light little lift, but a very practical little lift. We're going to meet Jekyll's most trivially simple taxonomy, the pages. So, all HTML and Markdown files that are not in some sort of special folder that starts with an underscore, right? So everything that's not weird, that is either .html or .markdown, is a page. And that is how you will read about it in Jekyll's documentation. So there's a section in Jekyll's documentation called pages. That's what it's talking about. All your Markdown files and all of your HTML files that are not in some sort of special folder. And if they are Markdown files, they will always get converted to HTML. Regardless of whether or not they have front matter, Markdown files will always have their liquid templates processed, always. It's just, if the file is called something.markdown or .md, it is going to get the deluxe treatment. Jekyll is going to apply all of its bells and whistles to it. Jekyll doesn't like stamping on HTML files because it's quite normal that you might, like, imagine you're using GitHub and you don't know anything about Jekyll, you don't know anything about Markdown, you don't know anything about Liquid, and you just want to put a how-to on the internet using GitHub pages. You're going to write index.html, you're going to put all of your code in HTML, you're going to hit publish on GitHub pages, and you're going to expect your HTML file on the internet unchanged.
Right.
Jekyll respects that. And the way it decides whether to be hands-off or hands-on is front matter. If there's front matter, hands-on. I am going to mess with this file. If there is no front matter in an HTML file, Jekyll says, okay, I'll just copy it across. I won't mess with it. Fine by me. So that's where the front matter really kicks in.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Now, we're not going to write HTML. We're going to write Markdown. So this is not relevant to us, but I thought it was important to mention it here. So index.md or index.html become my website / nothing at all. Waffles.md or waffles.html end up becoming my website .whatever / waffles. Under the hood, if you open the underscore sites folder, there is a .html file extension. But the Jekyll web server does not need a file extension. In WordPress speak, the slug is the bare file name.
So it's doing this because there's really only one index.html.
Yeah, so the reason the slug for index.html is complete blankness is because that's index.html's job, right? On a normal web page, you can just leave it out completely. And so Jekyll obeys that convention. For every other HTML or Markdown file, Jekyll says the slug for this page is the bare file name.
Okay.
Which means you can be very flexible. So you can write about.html and links.md, and it doesn't matter because the output is /about and /links. So
and is that Cramdown doing that?
That is Jekyll.
It's helping?
That is Jekyll. Cramdown,
well, there's got to be some Cramdown in there.
But only for the Markdown, right? So what I'm saying applies to HTML files or Markdown files. The mechanism for turning the Markdown into the output is Cramdown. The HTML files are never going to see any Cramdown, but they might see Liquid if they have front matter.
Okay.
The Liquid will pause until next time.
Okay.
So that's it. That's all there is about pages. When I say it's the simplest taxonomy, very simple taxonomy. So let's put it into practice. Let's make two little pages in our little website. We're going to make an about page and a useful links page. Both of them are going to be in plain old Markdown because that's how we do things here. And we are going to put the most minimal of front matter because at the moment our theme is immensely simplistic and it doesn't support any fancy features. So there's nothing else for the front matter to do yet. So the front matter is just the page's title as it should be presented in the tab heading. So our about page is going to be presented as about. Now, our theme is very mildly clever in that it takes the page's title, then it puts a vertical pipe, and then it puts the website's title. So it'll actually be about pipe Jekyll demo site. And links pipe Jekyll demo site. This is another one of those things you see all over the internet, right? My cool story - Ars Technica. Same idea. Okay. So what we have in the about page is the world's most basic Markdown. We have an H1 tag, just octothorpe H1 tag. We have 2 paragraphs, and our paragraphs contain some links. Right. That's it. As soon as you hit save... So you'll find the full content of about.md sitting in the zip file. Just copy it in. As soon as it appears, Jekyll will see it, do its build thing. And if you look inside the _site folder, you'll now see there is an about.html. And you can browse to it in your browser at 127.0.0.1 port 4000 /about. And there you have it. Similarly, we have the links page. It is basically the same, only it has an unordered list and some links, right? It's just Markdown, right? So we're not even I didn't even bother pasting in the show notes. You'll find it in the zip file.
Right.
So those 2 pages now exist in our little silly website, but our theme is so primitive that when you're on the homepage, you have no idea they exist, do you? Because the theme hasn't learned about them because the theme is still completely naive. So how do we put links to them? Well, they now exist as relative links, so we can just use Markdown to link to them. So simplest thing to do is to manually add the new second level heading to index.md, site pages, make it an unordered list. The text about links to the URL about. The text links to the link links. Oh, that's terrible to say. It's easier to read, though.
So let me make sure I understand that. It says in square brackets about, and then open round brackets about. And which one is which in that?
So the square brackets is the text of the ahref tag, and the round brackets is the href equals of the A tag.
Okay, but in this case, so it's just about because that's at that same level.
Yeah.
Because it's put about waffles sitting next to it.
And keep the link as about, and then your text would be about waffles, and when you click on it, you go to /about.
I'm going to sneak in and do that in the zip file when nobody's looking.
Yeah, perfect. This is why you're going to copy fresh every time, right?
Fine, you're no fun.
Yeah, but no, exactly. I am fun. That's what I'm saying. You're dead right. You really should start each time so that you can have as much fun as you like.
No, I'm saying the index. I'm saying the zip file for this episode. Oh. I'm going to change it.
Oh no! Don't do that. Don't do that.
Fine.
Do it in your copy. That's why you have a copy. So
okay. So this seems like this is maybe not the best way to do what we just did, right?
Yeah.
To hard code it like this. There must be a better way.
Do you smell a setup for maybe the next installment? Because that's pretty much what we have here. So that's a perfect moment to transition into final thoughts. So we're only just getting started on our website, right? It has a very, very silly homepage with an illustration kind of for the sake of proving we can. It has 2 pages and a homepage. And already we've hit 3 pain points that mean we have more to learn. So we have manually added a bootstrap class to a specific image, whereas really what we should have done is update our theme so that all images are handled properly, because you shouldn't have to do that in your Markdown every time. We have manually created a list of pages on our homepage. Well, okay, there's 2 pages, that's easy. But when there's 100 pages, that's not easy. That's a chore. And computers are supposed to do that for us. So obviously there should be a way to make Jekyll do that. And that's what templates are for, because we can have a little loop that says loop over all pages that exist and print an li followed by whatever, right? So that's our mustache templates, only they're called liquid. That's what they're for. So that's the next installment. And another thing we definitely have to loop back to is that we shouldn't have to even do that much. That should be baked into the theme. Because when you make a WordPress site and you start adding pages, you don't have to type in a PHP loop into your homepage. The theme just lists your pages. Right? Your theme decides where and how they should look and whether they should be in the top menu bar, in the sidebar or whatever. But the theme takes care of it. So our theme is going to have to learn, how do I print a menu, right? How do I print a menu somewhere on this page, and that every time we add a new page, the menu just updates? I mean, that's what we expect.
Sure.
So our theme has to learn that skill. So that's already 3 installments here. We're going to start in the middle. The one we're doing next is the liquid, because we need the liquid in order to be able to do the others. The liquid is Markdown is the most important skill. Second in line is liquid. And then when we know liquid, we can start to make the theme sing. But we need to learn liquid first.
And I like the idea of anything that automates stuff, and that's what liquid is.
Yes.
That's the automation part, right?
Absolutely. So that is where we shall leave it. And thankfully, we've tied everything up in a pretty neat package. Actually, this is a good time to have a pause because we don't have any dangling bits. We just have a nice, juicy teaser. So we're both going to have a lovely birthday party. You're going to go have a fantastic time in Japan. And then we're going to join back in here in 6 weeks.
All right. I hope we can remember all this, but I think we'll be able to. This was a lot, but it's documented so we can get back to it and go, okay, what do we mean by assets, that kind of thing. So the show notes is going to be our saving grace, that's for sure.
I know that 5 weeks and 6 days from now, I'm going to be rereading these notes, and then we're going to record.
Sounds good. All right. We'll talk to you in a little while, Bart.
Indeed. And until then, lots and lots of happy computing.
If you learn as much from Bart each week as I do, I'd like you to go over to lets-talk.ie and press one of the buttons over there to help support him. He does 98% of the work here. I'm just the stooge that listens to him and asks the dumb questions. If you go over to lets-talk.ie, you can support him on Patreon, you can donate via PayPal, or you can use one of his referral links. I really hope you'll go over and help him out. In the meantime, you can contact me at Podfeet or check out all of the shows we do over there over at podfeet.com. Thanks for listening and stay subscribed.